Military, and this is a new year. I got new music going on, and this video is called How to Work with an Author on a Self-Published Book. Mr. Jake Parker told me, he corrected me and said, you always say that your videos are, this video is going to be called, and he's like, your people watching it are like, well, it's already called that. So he called me out on that. He's kind of right about that. I'm excited to do this video. Before I get going, I wanted to draw attention to the intro. The painting on the intro is a painting that I did for the reboot of Painting Color and Light at svslearn.com. And I'm very excited. That class has not been released yet, but it's completely finished. Just kind of getting it in the schedule to release it soon. It'll be in the subscription. And I can show you this way. I'm just going to give you like a sneak peek of, this is on my iPad. That's one of the spreads that I'm doing for my new Bonaparte, or the sequel to Bonaparte. It's called Bonaparte Plays Ball. So lots of things going on. And what else? Let's just jump right into this video. So this, the catalyst for this video was a letter. It seems like that's where my channel's kind of evolved to, which is really cool because it makes it easier for me. I can answer questions that come in and things that I wouldn't have thought of on my own. And so I think it's great that way. And hopefully I'm answering questions that other people have as well. But this one came in from someone who asked to remain anonymous, so I'm going to honor that request. And basically, the person who wrote this letter is an author who would like to work with an illustrator and self-publish a book. So that's why the title of this, and it's so the perspective here is actually going a direction that we don't normally talk about on this channel, the perspective from the author, which I thought was very interesting. And hopefully there'll be information in here that you can use, or that'll help you, or even help other authors out there who would like to work with an illustrator. Now, before I get going, I'm going to just give you, and I put these in the description, a couple links to videos that I've done in the past that relate to this. So if you're kind of want to do a deeper dive on this, one is called 7 Reasons I Cannot Illustrate Your Children's Book, which I think is very pertinent to this conversation. And the other one is, should illustrators create self-published books? And that was an interview I did with Tyrus Gaucher a while back. And he is an illustrator who does work with authors who want to self-publish books. So I asked this person, the questions kind of came in, but they weren't that organized at first. And so I said, I'll do the video if you organize your questions. And so she did. And did a great job. And I'm just going to go through these 7 questions, and hopefully it generates some discussion in the comment section. So the first one is contract questions pertaining to more things like purchasing the artwork for the book outright, and pricing. Is pricing per page of the book, and how do we do a contract to purchase the artwork outright? Is there a template format you have found that people that self-publish have use? So basically the easiest answer to this one, or this group of questions, is there are no rules. Everything is negotiable. And so when you're, and this is going to be kind of a theme to a lot of these questions, but when you work with a publisher, you're dealing with a company that has a lot of people that are doing a lot of different jobs. So you'll have, like the contract department, the people that just handle contracts. You'll have people that just handle billing. You'll have people that just handle, the design of the book. You'll have people that handle the content. You'll have people that handle the marketing, the distribution, and probably a lot of things that I don't even know about that are going on behind the scenes. And so because of that, you're going to have people that are doing all of those things. And what you're asking here is, I guess the question here is, the answer here is you're going to have to do all of those jobs. So with negotiating or coming up with like contract questions and things like that, that's all going to fall on you. And just as every publisher does things a little bit differently, like not all publishers are the same, all contracts are a little bit different. I think what you're asking here for are standards, and in the self-publishing world, there really aren't any standards, other than the illustrator is going to expect to be paid, and you're going to expect to get artwork for that payment, and everything else is going to have to be worked out, and you're going to have conversations, and you're going to have to. What I would suggest you do is have a list of things that you know that you're going to need to do. A list of things that you know you're going to need to satisfy, and you're going to have kind of a long conversation with the illustrator talking about each one. And then once you come up with an agreement on how you're going to work, then I would draft up the contract. And I would use a contract that you can find online. You can just Google, author, publishing contract, illustrator, artist, publishing agreement. All those keywords will pull up contracts that you can use and you could modify. If you really want to go crazy, you can hire an attorney to rewrite it so that it fits your specific book. Although, I mean, the way that I always operate it, I feel like people are only as good as their word. And if you have an ironclad contract and someone breaks that contract, then what do you do? If the illustrator or the author is going to break that contract, what are you going to do? Take them to court? You have money to hire an attorney and take someone to court? Probably not. And so, and even if you do take someone to court and you get a judgment against them, then you have to collect. They can refuse to pay it, and then you have to take them back to court. I mean, it's just like, to me, I really try to choose wisely the people that I work with, and I try to determine their character based on meeting with them and being around them, and I know that's really difficult when you're going to be working with someone that you don't know, or that you haven't had experience or track record with or history with. So, but life is a gamble, and it's a journey, and it's an adventure, and I look at life as some of the projects that I do are going to succeed, some are going to fail, and I'm going to learn from them. And so, as far as I could give you, like, on this first one, a few things about, is pricing per page of the book, or is pricing out for the book outright? I tend to, I mean, if you do pricing per page or pricing per hour, you're still going to, if you're the one paying that money, if you're the author, you're going to calculate what your total budget is, and you're going to base your page rate or your hourly rate on what you have. You're not going to just come up with a rate and then not think about what that total would be. So you're already thinking of the total. I would just say, this is my budget for this book. I have $2,000, I have $5,000, I have $10,000, and I need you to illustrate this book, and that's for everything. That includes the cover, that includes the end papers, the title page. Any illustration work that needs to be done in that book falls under that total price. And then the illustrator can count out the number of illustrators, and they can figure out what they're making per page or what they're making per hour, or, and they can decide whether it's worth it for them. But that's how the big publishers do it. They don't price it per page. That's more of a comic book. I believe comic books are priced per page. How do we do a contract to purchase the artwork outright? I mean, you can negotiate with the illustrator. Typically, I can tell you I would think that for self-publishers, you would want to pattern your contract or your agreement on basically how the bigger publishers are doing it. And the way the big publishers are doing it, even the medium and smaller ones, is the illustrator retains the ownership of the physical artwork. I mean, if they're working digitally, then there's no original to sell. But if they're working traditionally, they own the artwork when working with a publisher, and then you can negotiate afterwards to buy it from them. I do know of an author who tried to buy the artwork from an illustrator, and the illustrator didn't want to sell it, so it's not for sale. And then I know other artists who have sold some of their work in galleries, and they've sold some of their work back to the author. I've sold some of my pieces back to authors that I've worked with. So that's kind of a standard thing. If you want, but if you want the artwork to be part of the agreement, you can work that into the original contract. You can say, I'm going to pay you, $10,000 or $15,000 or $20,000, but I get to keep the artwork. And for a lot of illustrators, it'd be worth it to do that. So that's basically, it's negotiable. Okay, number 2, maybe you can interview someone that's done self-publish, that's hired a self-publisher. Yeah, so I hired. That's the video in the description. Let me go down to number 3. Can you go a bit more into what you did in one of your videos where you mentioned how some artists think they're at a point where they feel they don't have to take directions from anyone? I find that interesting and odd at the same time, especially if they're working on a book for someone has written. Why would they refuse guidelines from someone who has a vision for that book? It's almost like, why bother doing illustrations for someone's book at all, right? So this is a great question. And if I were an author and I heard me talking about this, I would think, gosh, illustrators must be full of themselves, and they must be very arrogant, and but I think you might have misunderstood what I was saying before, and so this is a good chance for me to clarify. So basically, if you're an author, you're hopefully really good at writing, right? I mean, like that's what you spent your time doing. That's what you spent your 10,000 plus hours doing, is writing and honing your craft and getting really good at writing. And now I'm making an assumption that in most cases the author doesn't know how to illustrate or hasn't had any art training. And if they did, they'd probably be illustrating their own book, but not necessarily, because I do know some kind of outlier cases where author-illustrators have illustrated for someone else. In fact, a book that I almost sold to Scholastic I thought would be better illustrated by someone else. So I think that could happen. But in general, authors don't know how to illustrate. So what I meant was, illustrate, like for me, I love getting input and feedback and suggestions from my art director and from my editor, because they have the skills and the knowledge and the overall vision of how to take the book, and their job is to communicate directions from the author. So let's say the author writes a book that is heavily dependent on the illustrations to communicate. In other words, without the illustrations, you won't have any idea what the story is. The story won't make any sense, and without the words, the illustrations won't make any sense. And so they're heavily dependent on each other. In that case, the illustrator is going to have to understand what's actually going on when they get the manuscript. So they're going to have that input. And if it were coming through a regular publisher, they would get that input communicated to them from the art director or the editor. Whereas in a self-published situation, they would have to get it from the author. That's very different, getting an explanation of what the text means to telling the illustrator what to illustrate. And you as the author, you might think that you want to control the art, that you might want to really have final say and decide how, the content of the illustrations or the images. But you probably, the further along in this journey down children's books, the more you will probably realize that you're wrong. And the reason for that is the illustrator has to be able to be free to make art. And when you And every illustrator that's worked with a bad art director, or that's gotten bad art direction, or that's been worked with a creative director, or anybody who is, especially like in the advertising industry, I have flat files full of art that I would never show anybody because it's not art, because it was so heavily art directed that I wasn't free to create, and I lost interest. It's interesting. I've often said I would rather I would rather have a job digging ditches, or nailing boards to other boards, or doing something mindless, than have to have a job where someone is heavily art directing me every day. I'd rather not be an illustrator if that were the case. What I look forward to is what you look forward to as an author. You look forward to taking a blank piece of paper and writing a story, and being free to dream up and create and go where the story needs to go. And illustrators have to be free to think of things that would not only excite them but excite their audience. That's how art is created. Art is created from someone daring to take risks, to take chances, and to think outside the box. And when they're controlled, then they're not the artist anymore. And since the author isn't the artist of the art, if the author tries to become the artist, in other words, just being like the puppeteer and controlling the illustrator's hands, it's just going to turn out to be a disaster. And so with the big publishers, especially, it's funny when you work from small publishers to medium publishers to large publishers, the art direction becomes less and less and less up at the top. In other words, when I get a manuscript, my art directors and editors they'll say, here it is, go for it. And if there are a few art notes, they'll tell me, but for the most part, they don't give me any direction at all. And they want to see what I come up with. And then if after I come up with some loose, rough sketches, they might say, oh, we never even thought about that. That's awesome. These pages are awesome. Those are great. We love them. Something we would have never thought about because you were free to create. However, over here on these pages over here, we think that we might want you to make these little changes. Now, the changes they make are never, well, my vision of this book, this person looked like this, or they look like my nephew. My vision of this book, it wasn't in this sort of town. It was more in that, from my experience, authors are so close to the story that yes, you have a vision of what it looks like, but that doesn't matter to the reader. So the reader doesn't have the same history with the manuscript that you have. The reader, and especially like in maybe I can explain this better. If you read a novel and I read a novel, we're going to, and we both love that same novel. The movie playing in my head looks different than the movie playing in your head, looks different than the movie playing in this other person's head. We all bring something to that story from our own experiences, and we see that manuscript differently. And so the way I see it doesn't matter to the next person who reads it. Just like the way you see it as the author doesn't matter to most of the viewers, as long as the story is being, the nuts and bolts of the story is being communicated. And if you gave 100 illustrators your manuscript, you'd get 100 different books. And if you allowed those 100 illustrators to be really creative and do whatever they thought was best for your book, there would be, out of that 100, there would be 10 of your favorites. And out of that 10, there'd be 2 or 3 that would be Caldecott worthy, probably, if the story was good. And my contention is you would never get those top ones if you controlled the art. So I think it's a matter of degree of the direction that the illustrator is going to take. And what I have said before, and what I think you're probably referring to, is I've said on certain projects that I've taken on, Now, this is later on in my career, where I've said, I will illustrate this thing, and usually it's not a book, because I don't do self-published books anymore. But I've said things like, I'll work on your project, but you don't get to be the art director. I get total control over the art, and if you don't want to work under those conditions, then that's fine. Now keep in mind, these people aren't paying me a ton of money. If someone said, let's say there's an illustration that took a full day of my work, right? And they said, I've got $100, and it's a friend. I might say, okay, but I get complete control. If someone said they had $1,000 and they, wanted a day of my time, and they wanted some art direction, I still would probably say no. I probably at that point would just turn it down, because in my mind, I'm thinking, yeah, you have $1,000, but what if it spills over into day 2, day 3, day 4, day 5? I have no idea how insane you are or how sane you are. Like, some people are crazy and some people are sane, and I can't tell just from our initial contact which one you are. So it's easier for me to just say no. Or it's easier for me to say yes, but I get total control. If you came to me with $5,000 and said, here's what I want, this is all I want, and and I look at it and it's like, that's only gonna take me a day, and they're like, but it's gotta be right. We need to see sketches, and then we'll determine from those sketches what if there's changes and stuff. I would let you monkey around with me for $5,000, and even if it took a week, I'm covered. So that's kind of the thinking behind that. Taking art direction is there's a lot of illustrators, keep in mind too, have been destroyed by crazy people before you. So a lot of illustrators can point back to, I was working on this book with my mother-in-law or with my aunt, and I've gotten this all the time, and it's just not going well. What's going on? Well, just the direction that they want it. Like, I did sketches, and they don't like anything that I'm doing, and now I feel like I'm locked in, and I don't know how to get out of it. And I won't get paid because I put all this work into it, and now I'm not going to get paid unless I make the changes. But I hate the changes that they're coming up with, and so what do I do? And I'm like, yeah, you got yourself in a mess, and it's good to get yourself in a mess like that, because then you become more guarded in the future and more protective of not getting in that mess. Hence, that's why illustrators will say, yeah, but you don't get to be the art director, because you're not an art director. You're not trained as an art director. You didn't go to school in art. You don't know what you're doing. Yes, you will give some good direction based on your story. Some of that direction we need, but you're going to probably overstep your bounds and go into territory that you shouldn't be stepping into. And I'm not going to feel like I'm making art, and I'm going to feel like quitting this book. I did an assignment or a project with a woman. This was like 8 or 9 years ago, and I found out that it was a hand-me-down project from another illustrator, a friend of mine who quit. Ironically, this person, and it's a long story, but she wanted to make these cookies that went with a game that went into Walmart and stuff, and. Actually, I have the cookies. Hold on a second. Okay, so this is the actual product that went into Walmart, and I thought the project had totally died. Now, this isn't my artwork. I ended up quitting the project, but it was a situation where the woman was paying pretty decently, and she had been a toy rep at Mattel, so she had experience working with publishers and working with a company and getting stuff produced and put into stores and things like that. But she wanted the kids to look like her grandkids. I mean, she was doing all kinds of stupid stuff, and nothing was quite the way she envisioned it. And so finally, I just walked away from it. It was just more worth it to walk away. And you tend to get more bad art direction with people who aren't trained as art directors. So my advice to you on number 3 there is, just understand that the artist needs to be the artist. Understand that you're the author, and that if you really want the book to do well, you will allow the author or the illustrator to take possession of your manuscript and make it their own. it's a two-way street. And just think of it this way: you wouldn't want the illustrator there changing your story as you're writing it and saying, "No, I think that's dumb. I don't like the way that's going." You're an artist as an author. You're creating the story. You're not hiring a tradesman. You're not hiring. The illustrator isn't someone who just shows up and puts paint on it and just rolls the paint out and slaps some varnish on it and away we go. You're hiring an artist, and you've got to let the artist. You got to let the artist be a peacock and fly, right? Okay, number 4. Maybe elaborate on the pros of doing illustrations for someone that would work for a self-publisher. I know a lot more people are self-publishing. Just wondered why people only wanted a publisher to hire them. I mean, I get the steady job aspect of it, but wouldn't you be cutting out some jobs that may pay just as well? This is a great question too. So basically, why do you guys always want to work with a publisher instead of a self-publisher? Because you might be missing out on a lot of work or a lot of money by eliminating the self-publisher jobs. So the bulk of this is answered in the video that I linked below, the 7 reasons I can't illustrate your children's book. But I would say this, like, there are rich people out there who want to self-publish books, or people that prioritize self-publishing a book and are willing to make great sacrifices in the form of, here's a lot of money to illustrate my book. And then that represents like 2% of all the people who want to self-publish a book. The rest are like, hey, I have $500, I have $1,000. When the typical children's book for a small publisher, the advance is somewhere around probably $4,000 or $5,000 to $8,000, and a medium to a large publisher starts at 8, 10, up to 15. And then on subsequent books, if you're established, you can be getting 20, 30, 40, 50, $60,000 for an advance. So I would say now this is just a guess, but I would guess that most self-publishers are hoping to pay their illustrator anywhere from $500 to a few thousand, maybe $3,000 or $4,000 at the most. So right off the bat, the answer is obvious, right? It's money. But maybe you, the person who wrote this letter, maybe you are someone who's got a good chunk of money, and you're like, why is everybody turning me down? Well, it's because of all those others. So there's all those others are trying to get something for a lot cheaper, and that's basically it. And then but the art direction is, you have to understand how important that last question was on art direction. Illustrators would rather starve than work for someone who is controlling them. It's just the way it is, because then you're not an artist. So that is, to me, bad art direction is so expensive on my life, in the fact that I want to kill myself. I don't want to become suicidal, so I don't want to work for you if it's going to be like that. In fact, if you were my advice to authors, if you really want to attract somebody to illustrate your book, that would be in my initial letter would be, I understand how hard it is to work with someone who's giving you bad art direction or who's really controlling, and I don't want to be that person. The only direction I want to give you is if you're missing content, that if you're not illustrating the story, if there's something that you're not understanding or not getting with the story. And quite frankly, to revisit number 3 again, because I just had another thought. If I were the author, I think it's your job to say, because I'm not a big publisher, yep, I have to give up even more control than a big publisher does to attract an illustrator. Like, I have to take more of a gamble, since I'm not going the traditional route, that the illustrator might suck and might turn in something that I just hate, and I might end up having to pay him a kill fee and start over with another illustrator. I think that's your almost duty. I think it would be wise to do that, to say, look, and really be careful with the illustrator that you pick. Really look at their portfolio and say, man, this is exactly the kind of art that I want. Not Well, this is just an illustrator who's agreed to do my book, even though I don't really like their work that much. At least they've agreed to do my book, and maybe I can control them and make them do what I want. Nope, it's never going to happen like that. So pick the right illustrator, pick the one that you love the work that they've done. You have to see that they've done sequential artwork in their portfolio before, and you have to let them own it. Okay, number 5, do most illustrators know how to illustrate for ebook format? I plan to use Amazon, Barnes & Noble, if that's something to consider. So I would say most beginning illustrators probably, it's going to be hard. I have a solution for this. It's going to be hard for them to illustrate for both a printed book and an ebook format because they're going to be different dimensions. The best way to get around this, if you know that you're going to be releasing for both, is do a lot of spot illustration. Spot illustration can work anywhere. It's when you have full bleed images, either full bleed full pages or full bleed spreads, that the format isn't going to work. Now, one way around that you can explain to your illustrator, and this is going to be on you. So if you're the author and you're paying, then the assumption is that this is your project and that you're the person who is going to then publish this and foot the money to actually print the book. I don't think that you'll ever find an illustrator where you approach them and you go, hey, yeah, I want to pay you for this book, but then I want you to also help me help pay for publishing. I don't think that that's ever going to really happen. I think an author and illustrator might get together and say, hey, let's publish a book together and we'll split the costs. And then that situation, probably the illustrator, there's probably no money changing hands with the illustrator or the author in the beginning. They're probably just making this project together and sharing expenses. Or maybe the author's like, look, I don't have money to pay you, but I will publish this book and you'll get a published book in your hands. I mean, there's all kinds of ways to structure these agreements. And that would work for me. If I were beginning and an author said, look, I want to do a self-published book, but I'm going to give you a lot of freedom. And what you're going to end up with, I don't have any money to pay you, but here's what all the preparations I've done to publish this book. I'm going to spend my money. I know it's going to cost me this much. And they have a whole business plan, and here's how we're going to distribute it. I'm going to release it on Amazon. Here's who I'm going to get to program it because I don't know what I'm doing there. If they had a whole plan, I might go, at the end of the day, I'll have an ebook and I'll have a physical book, and I'll be able to use it in my portfolio, and I'll be able to share it on my website. And so, maybe I'd go for that. So that would be my advice for doing ebooks, is just do a lot of spot illustration, or if there are full bleeds, the illustrator can have a lot of margin, can have a lot of bleed, is what they call it, which is extra illustration on the outside of the crucial illustrated area, where you can crop it in different ways. You're not going to turn a horizontal into a vertical, but you can have a different dimension vertical, or a different 2 or 3 different dimension horizontals, or 2 or 3 different dimension vertical illustrations out of the same illustration if there's a lot of extra off to the sides. Now, that's not ideal if the format, if the parameters or the dimensions are quite a bit different, because then you're diluting your illustration on one of them to make it fit. In other words, you're getting a lot of extra illustration that isn't crucial, and without getting into the design of it, good illustration is reduction. It's not adding. So on those images where you're adding bleed, you're diluting the good stuff. And so it's not ideal. The best way that I would do it is with a lot of spot illustration. Number 6, I know that we have to give our text illustrator a draw around it and get their ideas. However, we would be giving them our vision and ideas for the book as well, and they build off that. But basically what happens after the artwork is finished, the text is placed in the book by someone that has done the art, and they export in a way that we can use it for ebook. Would like more help on that? Okay, so I think I kind of touched on that already. It's going to be hard for you to find an illustrator where you say, hey, I want you to illustrate the book and I want you to format it for ebook. Most illustrators aren't going to know how to do that. There will be a few, but finding the illustrator who says yes to illustrate your self-published book and that has the skills to make an ebook file and upload it and work with Amazon, and that's a you thing. Unfortunately, it's going to be rare for you to find that person. Most likely, you will need to work with someone else who will format it. If you don't know how to do it yourself, you will have to hire someone else to format it for ebook, and it's not that hard to do, from what I understand. If it's an ebook without animations, it's just basically just a images uploaded into a format with text, that's pretty easy to do. But it's something that you would have to spend your time figuring out how to do it yourself, or like I said, pay for someone else to figure it out. And finally, the last one is number 7. How do we make certain that illustrators are aware not to share anything about our book on their social media in terms of artwork until it's published? Should we even allow them to share on their sites after it's published? Well, I already did that in this video. I shared some of my work for my next book, but I didn't. I just showed you what was on my iPad, and that way there's not an image out there that could be shared around. And so that's an easy one. That's a contract issue where you basically say, hey, I don't want you to share anything from this until the book is published. I would think you would want them to share it after it's published. I don't know why you wouldn't want them to link back to the book that you guys published together, so that you would get more sales. So that's I would just clearly put that in the contract. And again, all these concerns and everything should be talked about verbally, or you should put them in the contract. I think you should talk about them with the illustrator, because you could, like, a lot of people will just, like, I could say sneak stuff into a contract or put it in the contract and not talk about it. And then, maybe the illustrator signs it and doesn't notice it. And then down the road, they're sharing stuff and you're like, hey, what are you doing? And they're like, what are you talking about? And, it creates this problem. I would have the conversation and just basically talk about it. And I think you can avoid, by avoiding those kinds of problems, everything's going to go smoother. Everything's going to go more easy. And anyway, these were great questions. If you asked another illustrator, you would get a completely different set of answers because there is, like I said in the beginning, there are no standards in this world, and you would get a lot of different opinions. And I'm sure that down in the comment section, there will be other opinions and contradictions. And that's the beauty of the free market, is that you and I are free to negotiate terms and work with other people and create free exchanges that work for both of us. And I'm different from the next illustrator, and I'm going to have things that I don't want to do, or that I am willing to do, that someone else won't be willing to do. So I would say, let's say you had an author who was a self-published author that's done 10 books. I'll bet every one of their contracts goes a little bit differently if they're working with 10 different illustrators. So anyway, I hope this one helped. Looking forward to a great 2019. And that's it. So I hope this video helped. See you on the next one.